Look, I personally believe SpaceX is the greatest company of all time, probably the most vertically integrated American manufacturing company. When you're vertically integrated, it just lets you move with like a speed and flexibility that no one else has, and that's where things like space data centers can just happen very quickly, shockingly quickly. SpaceX in 2019 was just a launch company. In 2019, they did 13 launches. The total global launch market, I would say in 2019 is probably like a $5-6 billion market, probably have like $1 billion of profit if you capture 100% of the market then. The company's valued at $36 billion in 2019, investing at 36 times the theoretical maximum earnings where you wouldn't be growing very much if you didn't find another market. I first invested in 2019, cumulative invested $1.2 billion. That position's worth like $12 billion today, the $800 billion valuation. Hopefully in the IPO it's worth a lot more than that. I think this is the healthiest wealth creation event in history.
I think that XAI is severely underrated.
You think Elon's underrated?
Welcome to Sourcery with Molly O'Shea, who's becoming very famous. It's great.
And I'm Shaun Maguire. I am a legendary X-poster.
Oh, shit poster. Post with a P-O-A-S-T-I-N-G.
So we have, I think, 4 different routes we can take this conversation. One of them is just going to be exclusive to X because YouTube won't allow it. And we'll save that for the end. Which route do you want to take?
Whatever
1
you
through
want.
3? You
You
like
choose.
math?
You choose.
Okay.
I don't know what's behind each of the doors, so you choose.
Okay, so let's start with SpaceX's upcoming IPO. I think a lot of people would love to have exposure to it, would love to know the inner workings of what's going on. The latest is that there's going to be data centers in space. So like, what is the update on SpaceX that people should know?
Great question. I'm very privileged to be a major investor in the company, and I'm just gonna start with the caveat that I take that as a huge responsibility, and so I try not to share anything that I don't think is already like public, but I'm pretty good at packaging what's public because I follow it very, very closely. Look, I personally believe SpaceX is the greatest company of all time. I think the company is just getting started. I have many other great portfolio companies, but I'm willing to say SpaceX is on a different level of every company. It's also just so fun to work on, like launching rockets into space. One thing for me that's kind of been a lesson of watching how Elon builds companies is I think he focuses on like the bottlenecks and the most important thing. And then once that starts to clear up, then he starts to focus on kind of like what you can do with the thing. Examples are, the company didn't really start working on Starlink until it became a serious issue in November 2018, which was 2 years after they'd been doing reusable Falcon 9 flights. So like my impression was he intuitively understood and the company understood that Falcon 9, they'd passed through this giant kind of challenging phase of getting Falcon 9 to be reusable, and they knew they were going to have a lot more launch capacity the next couple of years. And so it was finally time to start thinking about what do we do with all this extra capacity, and that's when they got really serious about Starlink. I think that a few things happened around data centers in space in the last 6 months or so. I think it's very similar, the same way that like you needed Falcon 9 reusable to become reliable. I think Elon and the company have gained a lot of confidence that Starship is going to be flying like reliably and reusable this year in 2026. Like that's my strong sense. And very quickly, like within 2 years or so, I think the company's basically going to have an excess capacity. Like they could launch all the just Starlink data satellites they wanted, all the direct-to-cell satellites they wanted, and they'd probably still have excess launch capacity in 2028 or 2029. And so on the one hand, you start thinking, what else should we be doing to be filling this capacity that's going to come, in 3 years or so? And on the other hand, like we all know what's happening in AI. We're limited by power, limited by regulation, even which is probably even more restrictive. And kind of the combination of excess supply, launch supply coming online with Starship, married with this extreme urgent pain point on Earth, got the company thinking very seriously around, like, can we actually do data centers in space? Does the math pencil out? And I mean, Elon has spoken about this quite a bit publicly. Like, the answer is yes. The public doesn't yet, like, the public hasn't yet gotten to see the full argument, like, hasn't gotten to see the math. But I'll just say, like, I think the math is really compelling, and I think data centers in space are, and I was on TBPN maybe 6 months ago saying, you know, I didn't say I don't believe in data centers in space. I said, like, it's the right macro. I'm not sure if it's the right micro. Like, I haven't done all the math. I can say I have now done the math, and I think it's going to be absolutely giant.
Is that what that big algorithm was when we walked in?
I don't even know which
You have
algorithm.
a huge, you have a huge whiteboard over there. Crazy. formula.
Unfortunately, I don't. You know, I didn't use the whiteboard, so that's not mine. That's someone else's.
Sourcery is brought to you by Brex, the financial stack trusted by more than 30,000 companies, including 1 in 3 venture-backed startups in the US. Nearly 40% of startups fail because they run out of cash. Brex is literally built to help founders avoid that. Unlike traditional banks that let your money sit idle, chipping away at it with fees, Brex is designed to help you spend smarter and move faster. Their all-in-one solution combines checking, treasury, and FDIC protection into one powerful account. You can send and receive money globally at lightning speeds, get 20 times the standard FDIC coverage through their partner banks, and even high yield from day one. With same-day and even same-hour liquidity, access your funds anytime. Companies like Scale AI, DoorDash, ServiceTitan, Hims, Anthropic, Flexport, Robinhood, and Plaid trust and use Brex. Start today at brex.com/sorcery. That's BREX.com/sorcery.
So of those things, I also want to talk about Starlink. Could you break down that business for people who don't know?
Starlink is an incredible business. You know, it's right now the first wave of Starlink was providing consumer internet from space, primarily in rural areas. So the way it works in simple terms is you launch a rocket. The rocket, like the initial V1 had about 60 Starlink satellites per launch. So you have these satellites in the sky that, you know, we've now kind of gone to 2 or 3 generations past that. So we now have about 9,000 satellites in space. These satellites can talk to each other using laser links. So they're passing huge amounts of data, you know, terabits per second, back and forth in the constellation. And then so you have this giant space infrastructure. And then on the ground, people have user terminals, which is just a little dish that's 10 inches wide or 12 inches wide or so, that is what's called a phased array antenna. And it's basically a bunch of radio waves that you can steer to basically lock onto a satellite and move from one satellite to the next as, you know, every 20 seconds or so as the satellite is moving out of view. All right. And so basically all it takes is these ground stations, these ground terminals at your house or on your car or whatever, or on an airplane now. You have these satellites in the sky. Data is from satellites to the ground and in space. And we kind of built the equivalent of all the long-range fiber optic cables that we had on Earth. So, you know, if you go back to like 1999 or so, Global Crossing is a big deal. They laid fiber optic cable across the Atlantic Ocean, made a lot of money moving data. Now these fiber optic cable equivalents are in space. You don't need the cables because it's just lasers talking to each other in free space. And so it's really like the best way in history to move data long distances. Starlink is now moving like a large fraction of the world's long distance data. And so anyways, like the consumer business was Act 1, then started to get into the enterprise business. Aviation was one of the first markets where that started to do well. I think aviation is gonna, and so now we're seeing it. Qatar Airways was one of the first airlines, you know, United signed up. Jet Suite X was actually the first airline, if I remember correctly. And we're kind of getting this flywheel going now where when people get on an airplane and they use Starlink and they have this magical experience, and I think a lot of times they're realizing, especially if you live in a rural area, like Starlink internet on an airplane is way better than the internet, than like the cable internet you have, or dial-up or whatever, depending exactly where you live. And so I think more and more people are getting awareness that way and will buy Starlink. And then now there's a new product, which is, and then the next product after that was the government product, Starshield. And now kind of the newest product in the Starlink family is direct-to-cell. So this is cell service from space, pretty insane. And so direct-to-cell initially is for like the kind of most, technically it works everywhere, but SpaceX is limited with how much data can move into really dense places, like dense cities. Starlink has a weird property that compared to terrestrial networks, like with the terrestrial network, when you build a cell tower, you have coverage just within a couple miles or whatever of the tower. With a Starlink satellite, it has coverage, over like everywhere it passes on its orbit, and so a lot of time is passing over deserts or oceans or places that are not very populated. And so we have like an excess bandwidth capacity in remote areas and like a shortage in dense cities. And so direct-to-cell is initially working with kind of many of the global carriers, like T-Mobile in America was the first one. And when T-Mobile has bad cell service or low coverage, then they can kind of move on to the Starlink network, and data will move directly from space to your phone. And so basically these satellites are mimicking, they're spoofing cell towers. And it's going to be an absolute, SpaceX just announced that at the end of last year, they had 9.2 million subscribers on the core Starlink consumer side, and 6 million direct-to-cell subscribers. Direct-to-cell is growing very quickly. And when we go like 5 years from now, all of my underwriting is, I think direct-to-cell will be probably even bigger than the original consumer internet business.
And what are the economics behind that? Maybe even compare it to
They're
legacy businesses.
Yeah, the economics are unbelievably good. There have been some very sophisticated analysts that have kind of put out their estimates. I may know too much here, but I will say it's incredibly good margins, incredibly strong unit economics. And it's very like positively disruptive, the same way how like Africa leapfrogged with cellular communications, and instead of putting landlines everywhere, they kind of went straight to cell phones. Like Starlink is really a leapfrogging technology. You don't need to have like ground infrastructure, and so we're seeing schools in Ghana, using Starlink so that kids can learn. But anyways, the unit economics I think it'll all come out in the S1, and the unit economics are incredibly good.
In our interview with David Center, we propped up one of the hats with like a red buzzer button, and he pressed it whenever he didn't want to comment on something. I'll just have to get a no comment. Yeah. But that was a good answer.
Yeah, I'm trying to give you something.
Maybe this could be a fun question, is like the unintended consequences of what it would be that the impact of like unleashing internet and cell to the world. Yeah. I mean, I at least notice it when I'm taking a flight. United, I think it's fake, but
it's not very heavily penetrated right now.
It's definitely not.
It takes, I would say I haven't seen the numbers in a while. I think it's probably within 9 months or so, most of the United fleet will be upgraded, but they install Starlink when a plane goes down for its like annual or biannual maintenance. And so you kind of have to wait for the plane to hit its scheduled maintenance window.
I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
Turing is training the next generation of AI with tasks that require real expertise and real-world judgment. That's why companies like NVIDIA, Anthropic, Salesforce, and Gemini partner with Turing. Turing builds realistic reinforcement learning environments and data systems based on real operational traces, the kind of infrastructure frontier labs need to train superintelligence. Visit turing.com/SOURCERY.
Well, what do you think the unintended consequences of like all of this access would be?
Yeah, I call this internet everywhere. Look, I think it's going to be insane, and I think it's going to feed into a lot of the other Elon companies. Like when you have a self-driving Tesla, now you pair that with, Starlink, and whether it's direct to cell or whether it's, they put a dish on the roof of the car, which someday I don't know why they wouldn't embed, like a dish directly into the car, because then you have a bigger, an optimized radio. Imagine you're in your car and you have Starlink and your car is driving yourself and you have perfect internet everywhere and your car starts to become, your living room, and you're doing your Zoom calls or, watching sporting match or talking to your grandkids or whatever. It's just like, we're going to go to where we have internet everywhere. Optimus is going to use this, military drones are going to use this, kids in Africa are going to use this. We're already, something that I think SpaceX has been very good about is whenever there's been a major natural disaster anywhere in the world, they're basically offering Starlink for free to, because all the terrestrial, usually both power and cellular communications get knocked out. And so anyways, this is an incredibly resilient additional layer of data movement that candidly is better than all prior terrestrial approaches in many settings, not in all, especially not in cities, but in most situations. It's pretty cool.
Within SpaceX itself, what is a component that excites you a lot? Is it visiting Starbase? What has it been like to be invested in the company?
Well, I'll just say the vibes at the company right now are unbelievable. The team knows that it's on the precipice of history, and everything to now has just been a warm up. It's toy stuff compared to what's coming in the next 5 years, and everyone in the company understands this. And so the first thing is Starship, and 2026 should be the year of Starship. That, it will. I don't think people will fully appreciate in 2026 what it means. When you go 5 years out, it's really gonna revolutionize a lot of industries, And then I think in roughly 2028, it's gonna be the year of direct to cell. And SpaceX talked about this publicly, but it's gonna take time. They just acquired a bunch of spectrum. It takes time to get, antennas in phones optimized for the spectrum, and they need a bunch of V3 satellites in space. But 2028, it's gonna be major cell service from space. I don't know exactly when the space data centers will start, but I think it's one of the biggest market opportunities ever. And then at some point in the not too distant future, they're gonna land infrastructure on the moon and Mars, and then eventually land Optimuses on Mars, and then humans, and all this is coming faster than people think. Yesterday I was at SpaceX in Hawthorne, and I'm going to Starbase in 2 days. It's just this kind of crazy thing. When you go to Hawthorne now, the first time I went to Hawthorne, I felt oh my God, this is the most amazing place I've ever seen. It's a literal rocket factory. And now after going to Starbase, Hawthorne feels like the tiny, small little, old, it's the, the Super Nintendo compared to a modern PC. And I wish other people could get the experience of seeing what SpaceX is building, the scale of infrastructure. And then the last thing I'll say is just the amount of vertical integration that's happening in the company. I think it's probably the most vertically integrated American manufacturing company. And when you're vertically integrated, it just lets you move with a speed and flexibility that no one else has outside of China. And it's, and that's where things like space data centers can just happen very quickly, shockingly quickly.
Is SpaceX the first Elon company you've invested in?
Yes. I first invested in 2019, and cumulative invested probably $1.2 billion and across all the different funds that position's worth like about $12 billion today. And in the $800 billion valuation. And so hopefully in the IPO, it's worth a lot more than that. And, but I really feel like it's just the very, very beginning of the company. And then I've been lucky after that to invest in most of the other companies. And I think they're all, like, I'm maximum bullish on all of Elon's companies. I think he is still extremely underappreciated.
You think Elon's underrated?
100%. Not like I would say he only gets like 10% of the appreciation he deserves.
Some of you may not have heard this yet, but our sponsor Public just launched something called Generated Assets, and it brings AI into investing in a way I've honestly never seen before. Here's how it works. You type in an idea like AI-powered supply chain companies with positive free cash flow, or defense tech companies growing revenue over 25% year over year. Public's AI then dispatches a swarm of agents that scan every single US stock, evaluates them, and instantly builds a custom index around your thesis. What really stands out is how clearly it explains why each stock is included. And before you invest, you can even backtest your idea against the S&P 500, so you're making decisions with real context, not just guessing. And beyond generated assets, Public lets you invest in stocks, bonds, options, crypto, all in one place. They'll even give you an uncapped 1% match when you transfer your investments over from another platform. If you want to build a portfolio that actually reflects your thesis, visit public.com/Sourcery. Paid for by Public Investing. Full disclosures in the description.
What was the process to first get into SpaceX? Because I can't imagine that environment was at all as enthusiastic as this environment.
No, look, I know this sounds crazy, but SpaceX in 2019 was a highly contrarian investment. And it was very hard. It was a very hard investment to convince people to do. And I didn't even really believe in it, the year prior. And so and I know it sounds crazy today, but a few things. One, SpaceX in 2019 was just a launch company. In 2019, they did 13 launches. The total global launch market, it depends how you count it, depends how you count China, some of the government launches, but I would say in 2019 is probably like a $5-6 billion market, like addressable market. And at the time, the way people thought about like the theoretical maximum EBITDA margin you'd have on a launch is like 40%. So it's about 2 billion of EBITDA if you captured 100% of the market, it's like 2 billion of EBITDA as a potential, thing. And so then it's an industry that requires a lot of capex investment and, depreciating assets. And so you probably have like $1 billion of profit if you capture 100% of the market then. And the company's valued at 36 billion in 2019. And so like investing at 36 times the 36 times the theoretical maximum earnings where you wouldn't be growing very much if you didn't find another market was like people just thought it was insane or stupid. And when I say people, there were some visionary investors that had invested very, very early. I believe in giving credit where credit is due, and you have people like, Founders Fund, and you have Valor, and you have VY, and you have a bunch of funds, and you have Steve Jurvetson from DFJ. You have people that really, really understood the long-term potential way before I did. But in 2019, it was pretty contrarian, or not pretty, like extremely contrarian. And another thing was Elon at the time, like Tesla, when we first invested, was about a $70 billion market cap company. And it was, a couple years, like shortly after production hell. And it just like, the perception wasn't, what it is today. And for Starlink, basically every prior internet constellation had failed. And I think if I deserve credit for something, it's that, like with my background in physics and some in communications, I was able to like understand that Starlink was actually going to work, a year before it was working, and to understand like what questions to ask to really like underwrite that. So that was it. There was just this weird moment in time where people were assigning basically zero credit to Starlink because prior internet constellations had been failures. and were assuming that the launch market was not going to grow, and Starship was like basically people were assigning zero value to Starship, and so I don't know. There was a weird, I would say, 2-year period where it was underappreciated, and then after Starlink got to about $1 billion of revenue, which was very fast. It was about 12 months after they got their first dollar of revenue, they were at about $1 billion of run rate. Like I'd say at that point, it became an extremely consensus investment. So there was this weird 2-year period where you could buy a lot of shares where people didn't get it. And now it's like, good luck finding shares. No one wants to sell. And, you know, it's going to be, I'm very excited for the IPO. It's going to be pretty incredible.
How do you think that like initial caution or I guess hesitancy on the business and having those early supporters has informed Elon in bringing in new investors? Because I feel like it's such a tight circle.
Yeah, look, and that's part of why I am very careful with what I say. And I don't want to say anything that's not already public. I mean, I think to operate at the scale that Elon operates, he needs to, as much as possible, be able to trust the people around him and, you know, and like trust that people are gonna, like when you are as aggressive as he is, like there's gonna be times where things don't look as good and like people need to kind of be patient during the hard times and, you know, very trustworthy with information for what's on the roadmap. And so, yes, it is a pretty small group of people, and I'm, you know, lucky to have been able to invest in most of his companies.
How did you get into the other companies? What was the process like?
I mean, once I started working with SpaceX, got to know other people, and that's basically it. And really, like the teams in the other companies are just as good. They're just kind of earlier in their development cycles.
Which of the other companies do you think is most underrated?
Honestly, I think they're all severely underrated right now. Like I think that XAI is like severely underrated, and it makes sense. Like its revenue scale compared to OpenAI, Anthropic, Google is obviously like much smaller, but it just kind of blows my mind that people don't understand how fast the company is moving. And like you just have to look at the derivatives of progress. And then also just like look the bottlenecks. I believe the bottleneck, at least for inference, is going to be like power. And even if you have the best model in the world, you know, if you can only like deliver it to 1% of the market or 2% of the market demand, like you're heavily limited in your kind of growth rate and expansion opportunities. I think XAI is gonna, like Elon's the best in the world at atoms, and I think atoms are gonna be a decisive factor in the AI race. And the way Elon builds companies is different than other people. The way I describe it is he builds up potential energy, and then he converts that potential energy into kinetic energy. Whereas a lot of other companies, like they're kind of, whenever they have potential energy, they're just immediately converting it into kinetic energy. Elon builds gigafactories that are not producing any cars or revenue for like 5 years, and then immediately start making, you know, 1 million cars. And you know, the company spent a decade trying to get almost a decade from Falcon 9 to Falcon 9 reusable, and then very quickly they get Starlink going. You know, now they've been spending almost a decade on Starship, and it's like $0 of revenue from Starship today, but it's about to be an unbelievable amount. You know, like with XAI, they've been building, you know, the biggest coherent training clusters in the world, and they're just not really focused on monetizing them right now. And it's kind of crazy to me that people don't understand the pattern yet. And it's not to say that I'm bearish on the other foundation model companies. I just think XAI is gonna shock people with the scale that it gets to quickly. But I'm bullish on all of them. Like I'm bullish on the Boring Company. I'm bullish on Neuralink. You know, Tesla's a public company, so I have no comment on Tesla. But I'm literally insanely bullish on all of them.
What are your thoughts on just the massive spend in the category?
I think it's rational.
Okay.
A year ago, I probably would have been more bearish on the spend. I think that there's a lot of things that have happened that make me more bullish and think it's rational. One of which, ironically, like I think the SpaceX IPO will actually help all private companies this year, including the AI companies, just because it creates a lot of liquidity and it draws a lot of capital, into tech, and people are gonna it will just create a lot of liquidity that can go into the next wave of build outs of AI companies. I also, Anthropic is rumored to go public in 2026. Like, I think that that will also catalyze a lot more, dollars into the category. And then, very importantly, I just think we've hit a point where I think we have hit AGI. And there's different definitions, but I think we've hit the point where, I think we've definitely hit the point where in most fields of math or physics or computer science, the best models are better than the average PhD student at a top 5 research program. And so it's just I think we've hit this point where the economic value is going to be so extreme. And we're seeing it right now in coding is probably the first real vertical. And then also just the consumer kind of next generation Google equivalent, next generation search, just ask whatever question, ask your, my son has eczema, and being able to ask questions about that and get a lot of ideas from the different models. It's just unbelievably useful and has replaced a lot of my behavior and many people on the planet. But I think the whole field is becoming more and more useful at such an extreme rate that it justifies the capex investments. That's my personal opinion.
And hopefully lots of liquidity events to come.
I think the liquidity events in 26 are going to be major, and I think are very important for keeping the party going.
Yeah, I just interviewed Snowflake's CEO, Sridhar, and I asked him
Great guy,
and he was so fun, and it was great. But they had one of the biggest software IPOs of all time, so I asked him about this.
Plug, my partner Pat Grady and Carl Eschenbach, they led an amazing investment in Snowflake, and it really was an incredible investment. They invested $100 million at $1 billion valuation, a few years before IPO.
But a question I asked him was, what do you think on this immense private lockup, and do you think these companies should go public? And if you want to know the answer, you have to listen to the episode, obviously. Yeah. But I'm curious from your standpoint, so as we move into, I also asked Vlad this as well, because he's a big retail, he's a big
Love
retail
Vlad.
guy.
I actually took graduate math classes with Vlad at Stanford when we were kids.
Really?
Yeah, really. Math, real analysis, math 205, ABC with, Brian White, this professor that wore koala shirts every day. Anyways, I've seen Vlad come a long way, and he's a freaking legend.
Mm-hmm. So do you think most of these, we're past the stay private forever phase, and now we're actually to the let's go public, this is good for you? Vlad was it's actually much better than you think.
Yeah. Look, I just think it's very company and timing specific. And for SpaceX, this data center opportunity came up, and it just creates an incredible catalyst to go public. And I think it's 100% the right thing for the company, given our needs. And then there's other companies, the other companies like Stripe, where I think it's makes sense for them to stay private right now. And so it's very company specific, and it depends on how much capital you need. I think at the end of the day, the public markets will, if you're a good business, will almost always be a better source of capital than private markets. Mm-hmm. But you have more control and kind of flexibility to make very long-term investments if you're private. And so it's this trade-off between access to capital versus long-term planning flexibility.
Given
But I
your-
hope we see more companies go public sooner. I mean, just as an investor, I'm biased, and like you need the liquidity events to keep the whole industry going. And so like I hope the SpaceX IPO catalyzes some of these companies. I think a lot of people were using SpaceX as an example of like they stayed private forever, so like I can stay private forever too.
Totally.
I hope them going public will catalyze a lot of companies. Like you better have a really good reason of why you're staying private past like, you know, $1 billion a year of revenue and profitability.
or Series like Q.
Series Q.
Founders ship faster on Deal. Set up payroll for any country in minutes, hire anyone anywhere, get visas handled fast, and get back to building. Visit DEEL.com/sorcery. That's DEEL.com/SOURCERY.
Given your exposure from early stage to growth stage and SpaceX's IPO, I think this is like an interesting kind of situation here. In LA, this is going to be the biggest wealth creation event in a very long time.
It'll be okay in Texas too.
In Texas as well. But since we're in LA and like you're an investor in a lot of companies here as well, one, what do you think the unintended consequences of that would be on productivity here? I've talked to some founders and they're a little worried because some of their employees have like 70 cents, you know?
I think that in most companies it's kind of destroyed the culture. I don't think that's going to be the case at SpaceX because SpaceX is such a mission-oriented company. And as I was saying before, the next 5 years and then 5 years after that have like the coolest freaking milestones ever. And a lot of this team has been working towards this. I mean, some for 20 years, you know, many for the last 5 or 10 years. And it's like, why would you slow down or retire when we're about to put people, like humans, on the moon and Mars? And I think it's just, there's something like the reason to work hard at SpaceX transcends the mission of most companies. And I think it's insulating from a lot of the bad behavior that comes from like if you're working for a social media app company and now you're rich, it's like, okay, I can go keep, you know, giving AI slop to children or, you know, like, or go hang out on my mega yacht. You know, or in this case, it's, and I'm sorry, that's not a dig at any one company. Like it's just a general statement. It's really just a value statement that, like, the SpaceX mission is one of the coolest and most pure missions of any company in history, and so it kind of transcends just the typical incentive system.
Given the fact that this is a huge wealth creation event in LA, also in Texas, Sequoia, very large investment firm, many exits. How do you prepare founders and founding team members for these liquidity events? What are your wealth tips?
I don't like, honestly, I don't have a prepared answer, and I don't like, nothing immediately comes to mind.
Could be even psychologically.
Yeah, no, the psychological is the most important thing, and it's like I've had a lot of bespoke conversations like with individual founders, and it's kind of tailored to them. I'm really not worried about it in the case of SpaceX. Like in the case of SpaceX, I think these people are going to go on to do the most amazing things with their money. You know, there's this meme that a lot of, like, I'm sorry, but like the wives of tech billionaires have gone on to, you know, do all these NGOs and like bad causes, candidly. I think SpaceX is going to be the literal opposite. These are like the people that were there the longest. You know, like the people that are going to make the most money are the people that have been there the longest, and the people that have been there for 15 plus years. They've had to battle, you know, environmental groups, and they've had to battle, you know, physics. They've had to, you know, like they've been building hardware. They've had to be so frugal. Like it's already a culture that one is prepared. Like these people are naturally frugal. They're also naturally driven by what I consider to be very positive things. Like most people that joined SpaceX more than 15 years ago, like they did it for the mission. They did it because they love space and they want to like build rockets, and they want to, work with their hands, and they want to keep America competitive in space industry, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like, it's self-selected. And I think most people the people that were there early didn't think it would ever become this big of a company. So they didn't do it to get rich. And they got rich very slowly. And they got rich with like very real skills and real world experience of how, like, candidly, like how much of the world is designed to like take money and do bad things with it. And so anyways, I think this group of people, like, I think we're gonna see more beautiful travertine sculptures in cities, like just for public art. I actually know I have two good friends that were pretty good friends that were pretty early SpaceX people that left to become artists. And it's just like, that's their passion. And I think we're gonna see really, it's not gonna be like any other tech wealth creation event just because of the nature of what the company does and how slowly it happened, and the people didn't work there just to make money, and the hardship that they've had to go through to get where they are. It's gonna be sweet. Get ready for more like real positive stuff and just quirky things. Like I hope, I used to go to Burning Man for probably 10 years, something like that. And I had some very good friends in my camp built this thing, they called it a movable feast. It was a movable dining table. So basically it either had a motor or that you would steer, like and drive, or you could pedal it. And to go on the movable feast, you had to wear black tie. So we would, we would wear black tie, and then a couple other people from the camp. So some would be participants, some would volunteer to be like surfers, and would literally go around on this movable dining table and eat like a 3 or 4 course meal in black tie, like in the desert. And I know that sounds just absolutely stupid, but it's so whimsical and so fun. And when you get like 8 to 10 people in this very unique, crazy, just fun environment, it's just fun, and you bond with people. And I think we're gonna see a lot of like whimsy out of the, like physical whimsy out of the SpaceX crew.
More inventions.
So much stuff.
Okay, so this sounds like a healthy wealth creation event.
I really do think this is the healthiest wealth creation event in history.
Hey, it's Molly. If you enjoy our interviews, check out our newsletter, Sourcery.vc, where we deliver a once-a-week top deals and tech headlines email, and also go deeper on our podcast interviews. Subscribe to Sourcery today. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. Link in description to sign up.